through heartaches and pain, through the hurts and disappointments, when we can't see and don't understand. Be our shelter, our guide, lead us to that oasis where sweet peace and rest we will find. Oh, I need thee, Lord. Oh, I need thee this moment. Spread your wings and shelter me. When the storm is raging, let me hide in your presence. Hold me close and comfort me. Oh, Lord, I need thee. When broken and weary, and it seems I can't go on, and my light has gone out and I'm blinded, pick me up, carry me, hold me in your strength and power. Let me weep on your shoulder, stay with me. Oh, I need thee, Lord. Oh, I need thee this moment. Spread your wings and shelter
Turn to page 341, sorry. He included me. Well, go ahead and stand when you find it. We'll do the first and the last verse. 341. I am so happy in Christ today that I go singing along my way. Yes, I'm so happy to know and say Jesus included me too. Jesus included me. Yes, He included me when the Lord said whosoever. He included me. Jesus included me. Yes, He included me when the Lord said whosoever. He included me. 341 on the third. Freely come drink words the soul to thrill. Oh, with what joy they my heart do fill. For when He said whosoever will, Jesus included me too. Jesus included me. Yes, He included me when the Lord said whosoever. He included me. Jesus included me. Yes, He included me when the Lord said whosoever. He included me. Amen. You can be seated. And a lot of things that we can be praying for, need to be praying for, and I'll mention some more of this in the morning service. It seems like when things happen, they all happen at the same time. But Miss Barbara came back home. We got her settled in the house and everything, and so a lot that we can do to help her out. So we'll be talking about that a little bit this morning. Of course, Brother AJ and Miss Chrissy are still gone as well, and exciting for them. But then I want to mention this as well, just so you know, but Brother Josh's dad passed away this morning unexpectedly. And he's here, obviously, this morning and planning to head up tomorrow at some point up in Ohio. And just collapsed and died. And so very, very unexpectedly. He was here. A lot of you got to meet him. When was that, Josh? October? September? And so they were here and spent a week or so. But very unexpected this morning. So just be praying for him and especially for his mom. His brother's there in Moldova, and so he's going to be trying to fly back as well. So just be praying for that whole situation. But just difficult. And Pierre's are gone this morning too. They're traveling, so pray for them also. But let me read this to you. I think this is really interesting. This is actually from the Guinness Book of World Records in 2021. But the best-selling book of all time is the Christian Bible. It's impossible to know exactly how many copies have been printed in the roughly 1,500 years since its contents were standardized, but research conducted by the British and Foreign Bible Society in 2021 suggests that the total number probably lies somewhere between 5 and 7 billion copies. In the 50 years that followed the Gutenberg Bible in 1454, it's been estimated that European printers produced 15 million books, the majority of which were Bibles. By 1815, the total number of Bibles printed numbered around 1.3 billion. One key milestone in the history of the Bible comes in the early 19th century when the first Bible societies were founded. These organizations ordered Bibles in huge numbers but gave them away or sold them at cost as part of their Christian mission. A study produced by the British and Foreign Bible Society, founded in 1804, calculated that 2,458,000,000 Bibles were printed between 1815 and 1975. In the 21st century, Bibles are printed at a rate of around 80 million per year. The following is excerpted from The Good Book Business, The New Yorker, December 10th, 2006. So this is a little bit older, but the familiar observation that the Bible is the best-selling book of all time obscures a more startling fact. The Bible is the best-selling book of the year every year. Calculating how many Bibles are sold in the United States is a virtually impossible task, but a conservative estimate is that in 2005, Americans purchased some 25 million Bibles, twice as many as the most recent Harry Potter book. The amount spent annually on Bibles has been put at more than $500 million, which is pretty amazing. But I've read that article and I was thinking this, don't think for a second that a lot of these people that are coming up with these new versions of the Bible and trying to reprint Bibles and everything else are not looking at it as a money-making opportunity. And that's one of the reasons why so many of these new versions and stuff are coming out. It's a huge moneymaker because they know that the Bible is the best-selling book of all time. Why wouldn't you come out with a new one and make money off of it? So a lot of these publishers especially are not interested in getting you the best version. They're interested in getting their pocketbooks filled up. Because it's a billion-dollar industry. But still amazing that not only is the Bible the best-selling book of all time, it's the best-selling book every year. And we get to hold it in our hands. How amazing is that? All right, well, let's split up into our classes.
All right, good morning. Hope you all have had a great week. With all this wind, hopefully nobody's had any trees come down on their houses or anything. I heard when the first night we had all the wind, I was laying there, and that was going through my mind. I hope nothing falls on the house. I don't feel like dealing with it. It's not even necessarily the house. I just didn't feel like dealing with it. And I heard a crack, and I went, oh, no. And then I heard a boom, and it landed on the ground, not on my house. I said, I don't even care, as long as it's on the ground. But hopefully y'all have not had any issues with that. Deuteronomy chapter 8 is where I'd like all of us to turn to. Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 18 is where we'll start. And this is lesson number 12 out of 13. So we're coming to an end here. Not that sometimes in seminars or classes, at the end you're just kind of concluding, wrapping up, and that's not what this is. Each one of these lessons is just as important as the others. So we're not wrapping up in a sense that we're just reviewing. We're still talking about two more topics, but this is a very important one this morning. If you have your books, you already know what it is. If you don't have your book, that's fine, or you don't have a book, that's fine. If you can just follow along as we go to the different passages. But again, I keep reminding us, and for those that haven't been here the whole series or something like that, a reminder is this morning we're going to talk about biblical stewardship. And this is not a message on stewardship. I like messages on stewardship. I love to hear about giving, and I love to hear testimonies about how the Lord has blessed through giving. But that's not what this lesson is. These are first steps for brand new Christians. So this is more of a lesson. And remember, what we're doing here in these lessons is teaching you how to disciple a new Christian, somebody that you've led to the Lord or whatever. And there's only 13 lessons here. There are whole, year-long discipleship courses. There's a lot of other stuff out there. This is just the very, very beginning basics. Because you have to know that a brand new Christian who's never been in church probably has never even thought about giving. They've probably never thought about giving to a church or what that looks like. They may give, to the St. Jude Foundation and stuff like that at Walmart. They understand charitable giving, but they don't understand why. The church is not just, when we give to the church, it's not just a charitable giving to make the pastor happy. This is something we do before God, whether the pastor's begging for it or not. A Christian has to understand what it is that we're doing. So I like the title of this, that it's biblical stewardship and not just biblical giving, because it is much more inclusive, stewardship. And Pastor, this is the 1-2 punch. He didn't know this lesson was going to be this morning, and he preached on it, I believe, last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. In one of his points was talking about giving. And so he covered some of what we're going to be talking about, but he also said this, and we will hear in a minute, that giving is not just money. Giving is everything that God has given to us, is what we are supposed to be stewards of. So if you look in your book, we are on page 79, chapter 12, and I'm going to read this first paragraph and make some comments on it, and then we'll get into Deuteronomy chapter 8. But before we start, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll get into it. Father, I thank you for this day you've given us. God, I thank you for your word. Thank you for the truths in it and the instruction in it. And I pray that when we find something that we are not doing as well as we should at. I pray that we'd make the changes we need to be as right with you in those things as we possibly can. And God, giving is one of those things. We can never give you enough to pay for what you've done for us. And so, God, we try to give. We try to keep your work going. And as you provide for us, God, I pray that our hearts would be willing to give that back to you. And I pray as we go through this lesson that if there's some that don't understand what true biblical giving is, that this would be a start to learning what it means to give back to you. And those of us that have been in church a long time and do understand it, maybe we aren't doing what we should. Pray that we would shore that up, but also that you'd encourage us in this, that this is the best investment that we can put our money to. And I pray that you would just encourage us in that. Pray that you be with this Sunday school hour in Jesus' name. Amen. So he says, everything we own belongs to God. And I hope you believe that. That's a statement that we can kind of gloss over, but everything we own belongs to God. We are simply stewards who manage God's possessions. The moment we accepted Christ, we became accountable for using wisely those things that God has given us. And we're going to see this in Deuteronomy chapter 8. He says, well, I wrote this too. And remember, I'm telling you what I wrote in my margin so that you can kind of make some notes because you're going to be discipling somebody. And just like a good teacher, Greg, I work with Gray. Sometimes we'll go into training sessions and they literally get the book out and read you the book that you have sitting in front of you. Well, I can do that, if that's all training is. But a good teacher is able to add to what's in the book through experience or just through having taught it for a long time. And so when you are discipling somebody along, you want to have some notes in the margin that you could say, oh yeah, I wanted to make this point, especially when you're on the spot as a teacher. So I wrote this in my margin for here when it says for using wisely those things God has given us. I underlined things and said this is time, money, talents, children, resources. This could be a trade and it's used when the church is needing that trade. That's good stewardship. God gives us the ability to learn how to do things. Some people, would willingly admit they're all thumbs. I'm not handy, whatever. That's fine. But those that are handy and have a trade or whatever, when God's work needs that's a way to be a good steward of something God has given you. And I wrote this also in my margin. We just went on Belize. We went to Belize 18 months ago, I think. I think it was about 18 months ago. And the whole purpose of that trip, normally a missions trip is to go knock on doors and really, evangelize. This missions trip was to build a school building. And I wouldn't consider myself, I would consider myself handy, but I'm not skilled. How about that? I can learn things, but I don't know what I'm doing. And so I was down there kind of as a laborer for sure. But they had guys that came from a couple different churches to Belize, and we built an entire school building. Now, not up to U.S. code for sure, but built an entire school building in 4 days. And but it was guys who do that. That is what they do for work, and it was just like a bunch of ants. I wish we could have done one of those time-lapse videos because I'm sure it was just crawling around. But that's a good steward of something God has given you. You can take that time and give it back to God's work. And this is not, you'll hear sometimes somebody with their collar turned around backwards, I'm a man of the cloth, or I'm God's man. That's not what this is either. The Lord's work. It's not because it's the Lord's work, it's automatically, or if it's called the Lord's work, it's automatically something super, super good. Because there's a lot of religions out there doing what they would consider the Lord's work. That is anti-God. So, anyways, those things are anything God has given us the ability to do or to have that we give back to him. He says this then, giving is an opportunity for us to invest in eternal riches, and it gets our eyes off the riches that fade away. All giving in the New Testament is done, if you read, is done in and through the local church, which is very important. There's a lot of organizations out there that there's nothing wrong necessarily with helping them out or giving to them, but when we give, and this is not we already did a lesson on the local church and why it's important. But the local church is an accountability center for missionaries and different, evangelists and things like that. I think everybody going out into that kind of work should be through the local church. Why? Because then they have a pastor who, when they get off a little bit, can come to them and say, hey, you're wrong on this and you need to change that, or you're not going to be going through our church. It keeps them accountable. And so money that is going out to those resources should go through the local church. That's the example we have in the New Testament. Then he says, this world has a way of viewing money and material possessions. Those views, the world's views, are promoted through television, advertising, corporate and retail business, and a variety of other means. However, God's way of viewing money involves a simple concept called stewardship. We have examples of that in the New Testament. That was our verse last month, Matthew 25:23. What did that servant do with the money that was given to him? That's God's view of stewardship. He doesn't say, and the Bible doesn't necessarily talk about, what kind of investments you should do in this world. But are you a good steward of, even in worldly investments, you should be a good steward. Not risking, these some kind of crazy investment that, man, if it hits, it's going to be good, and if it doesn't, I'm going to lose everything. That's a terrible steward of what God has given you. And so, even in our worldly investments, in our worldly work, and by worldly, I mean earthly possessions, we should be good stewards of what God has given us. It says God's way of viewing money involves a simple concept called stewardship, and this is presented to us in his word. All right, so we have those important terms, tithing, steward, and free will offering, and you can look at those. Free will offering, I think, probably is the one we don't really know. It sounds like something we would, that would be in the the Old Testament, and that was a free will offering that the Jews would have done. But a free will offering simply is giving beyond the tithe, which we'll look at in just a second, as the Lord leads and instructs. So it's not something that's required of you. It's of your own free will that you're giving back, and that's what he means by free will offering. All right, so here we go. Key Bible truths. First, the purpose of stewardship. What is the purpose of stewardship? And he says, first, it's to manage the owner's resources, and I circled owners, because it's not my resources. It's not my stuff. It all belongs to God. And he says that. Everything we have belongs to God. Now, the first sentence of the whole thing was everything we own belongs to God. And now he says here, everything we have belongs to God. It is. Everything we have belongs to God. And he says, though you may have worked hard to earn what you possess, it was God who gave you the sustenance to do what you did. And here's where we're going to Deuteronomy chapter 8. And look at verse 18. And if you're filling in your book as we go, this is where you get the blank there in verse 18. But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, and that's the blank, that he may establish his covenant, which he sware unto thy fathers as it is this day. Now, he's talking to the children of Israel, but this principle is very, very applicable to us. Thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth. So, even if you have the things you do have, God gave you the ability to get those things, not just through wise investments necessarily, but if you say, I started with nothing, I worked hard, worked my way through this corporation, and I made it to the top, and God gave you the ability to do that. He gives us the very breath that we have. And I wrote this in my margin, and I'd like you to as well, but go all the way back to verse 11 of chapter 8 here. And it gives us some context. He's talking to the children of Israel, but he says this in verse 11. Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God, in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command thee this day. Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God. In verse 12, he says, lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses, and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led thee through the great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee, and that he might prove thee to do thee good at thy latter end, And thou say in thine heart, my power and the might of mine hand hath gotten me this wealth. And that's where we get to 18. But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it's he that giveth thee power to get wealth. That's something very important for us to remember. Sometimes we do hear about an investment or hear about a good opportunity with business or something like that, and we research it, and we study it out, and we learn it, and then we put our resources toward it, and it's a success, and we go, yeah, I did my research on that one. But he's saying, don't forget, God gave you the ability, the understanding. He gave you everything to be able to get thy wealth. In verse 17, this is the danger. And thou say in thine heart, my power and the might of my hand hath gotten me this wealth. It's from God. We must remember that in order to be a good steward. Because if it's my money, I can do what I want with it. I earned it. I can lose it. I can take those risks. I can, whatever. But if we understand that it's God's, we're going to be more careful with it. And you understand, this lesson is not just about giving to the church. This is about everything I have, everything, being a good steward of it. And then he says, you'll see in your book, Psalm chapter 24, verse 1, the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, everything in it, the world, and they that dwell therein. Well, who dwells therein? Each one of us. So we're the Lord's. We are his, and we even need to use our time that we have and our bodies, and as we talked about before, our skills in good stewardship to the Lord. All right, so the purpose of stewardship is to manage the owner's resources, and secondly, to multiply the owner's resources. And we see that in Matthew chapter 25 and in Matthew chapter 23, where the servant, the one went and hid the talent. I knew you're a hard man, and I knew you would, you wouldn't be happy with anything I did with this, so I just hid it, and I'm giving you back the thing you gave me, the one thing. I didn't multiply it at all. And what did the Lord say to that servant? Thou wicked servant. You didn't even attempt to multiply my resources. So there we have the principle that we should be trying to multiply what God gave us. And we don't multiply that necessarily by giving to the church and just expecting a windfall later. Now, God promises blessing to those that take care of him, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the things he has given us. We should be multiplying those resources with what he has given us. So he says this, how do you multiply God's resources? One way is by making sound investments. He's talking about earthly investments. Other ways would include not being wasteful, not becoming irresponsibly laden with debt. And I understand that some people have never been taught about money. That's not an excuse. Go learn about it. Or go find somebody who is good with money that you've seen them. Man, this guy always seems to have what he needs, or he always seems to, he doesn't work a super, super good job, but he always seems to have because he's good with God's money. And so he doesn't become irresponsibly laden with debt. And there's others I know. There was a guy growing up, and I haven't even seen him for probably 20 years or more, so I'm sure he's not tuned into this live stream, and I won't say his name, but he had a really good job at the railroad, really good job, and had been there for 20 years. And my dad owned his own business also, but he had 10 kids. 10 kids eat up lots of resources, okay? And so even though he was making good money, we got by fine. I wouldn't say we were poor. At least I didn't feel poor. Maybe we were. But this guy would always, it happened it felt like every week, but I think it was probably every few months, he would call my dad. Hey, can you give me some money? It happened all the time. And my dad was okay friends with him, and he would help him out. But he did, at some point go to him and say, listen, you need to figure out. And I don't know what he had going on in his life, but making all that money, and he could not make ends meet. Why? Irresponsibly laden with debt. I understand debt that comes, that stuff you just can't help. But irresponsibly laden with debt is a terrible steward of the money God has given and the things God has given. But he says this, but one real way to get the best return out of your investment is to give it right back to God. And I wrote this in the margin because this is becoming very, very popular, the prosperity gospel. This is not prosperity gospel because he says this, depositing the resources he has entrusted you right back into his kingdom work is a sure way to multiply what he's given you. But is it to multiply in my pocket? No, it's to multiply what he's given me. And that's in eternity. Because he says that. Because when these temporal dollars are invested into God's eternal work, they miraculously transform into more temporal dollars. Now, into eternally significant investments, especially when they help people hear and receive the gospel of Jesus Christ. So it's a great investment to put our money back into, and often when the ushers are up here to take the offering and they pray beforehand, that's often what they pray, that God would use this money to reach more souls with the gospel. That's what our goal is, and that's what we're giving toward. So I wrote this. This is actually the prosperity gospel, but it's eternal prosperity. God multiplies gifts to him for his use. And it's wonderful to be a part of souls being saved. And that's what we hear often in missions, when we're emphasizing missions and things like that. We can't all go to India or Belize. In fact, we may not all even be able to afford a trip to one of those places. But when we are giving our money to those that are working there, God is using that toward our account. And you'll see this in Philippians chapter 4, verse 17. And it's there in your book. But there's a word missing, so I'm going to go there. I have it, but I want to make sure that you know I'm reading the right verse here. It says in Philippians 4:17, not because I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. Who's talking here? Paul. And who's he talking to? The Philippians. And what is he asking for? Anybody know? Huh? He's asking for money. Is what he's asking for. He's the typical Baptist preacher, right? No. But he says, now ye Philippians, verse 15, know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but you only. So they had asked him about giving and receiving. What does it look like? Verse 16, for even in Thessalonica, ye sent once and again unto my necessity. So when I was in Thessalonica, you sent money to me. You gave me money. Not because I desired, and this is what he says, you sent once and again unto my necessity, not because I desired a gift, but because I desired fruit that may abound to your account. So basically, this is Paul, being the missionary, saying, God's going to take care of his work, but I want to give you a chance to give toward this work and toward these souls being saved. It's exactly what he said. I didn't desire a gift. I desired that fruit would abound to your account. I wanted you to be able to be a part of this. And this is important because rightly so, I think sometimes, often people despise giving to churches. All they ask for is money. All they want is my money. Every time I go, they're begging for money. And most of the time, churches completely run, for the most part, typically, unless they have some kind of a book ministry or something like that, but they run on gifts. And so naturally, the pastor who is always asking, or hey, it's understood, we need your money. We need these gifts. And so people get tired of hearing, all they want is my money, because they don't understand what stewardship is. Now, if we are a good giving church, the pastor should never have to beg for money from us. When a pastor has to get up and beg, I think that is a blight on the people in the church. That we're not just doing our part in giving to God. Because God will lay that on our hearts as quickly as he'll lay it on the pastor's heart that we want to start this ministry or whatever else. And so he lays on our heart to give. And somebody who doesn't understand biblical stewardship, a new Christian, is going to be frustrated, I think, by constantly being asked to give. I work hard for this money. Right. And remember in Deuteronomy 8, God gave you the ability to be able to work hard so that you can give back. So to multiply the owner's resources is the other purpose of stewardship. Now he says the Bible talks about several different kinds of stewardship. And firstly is the tithe. And if you go to Hebrews chapter 7, and I'd like you to go here because we're going to read a few verses even though there's only part of one there. But Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 8. Because it kind of doesn't make... If you read the context, you'll understand it. But in verse 8, he says, and here men that die receive tithes, but there he receiveth them, of whom it is witness that he liveth. And who is it? Men that die receive tithes? He's talking about the priests. The priests die, and they take your tithe. But if you go to verse 1 of chapter 7, he's talking about Abraham when he was coming back from the slaughter of those that had captured Lot. And that's what chapter 6 at the end is talking about. And then chapter 7, verse 1, he says, "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to him also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being by interpretation king of righteousness, capital K, and after that also king, capital K, of Salem, which is king, capital K, of peace, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually." And there's a debate about who this Melchizedek was, but you can pretty much see here, no father, no mother, no beginning of days, no end of days, who he's talking about. So Abraham was giving this to God. He was not just giving to some priest, which is what he's talking about in verse 8. "And here men that die receive tithes." The preacher, the priest in this context. "But there he receiveth them, of whom it is witnessed that he liveth." And so basically it's talking about the tithe here in Hebrews chapter 7. And you can read more about Melchizedek there and why Abraham gave to him. And so I wrote this. Well, let's read this. A tithe is 10%. Because I want to make sure we're covering the basics. Remember, this is for brand new Christians. You may have never even heard. A tithe is 10%. You've heard the word tithe, but a tithe is 10%. Why? Because we have this example of Abraham. That's where we get that 10% from. He gave a tenth of everything he had to this king. And as our love for the Lord grows, we willingly give 10% of our income to him. It is amazing how the Lord blesses this simple act of obedience. And if you've done this for any length of time, you see those blessings. And this is where they get off with the prosperity gospel. You give it to me. I need a new airplane to be able to get to you so I can teach you. But that's not what this is. This is giving to God, to God's work. And we'll see this here in a second about how we're supposed to give, what our attitude should be in giving. But he says, "It is amazing how the Lord blesses this simple act of obedience. Many Christians have seen God give them more than they ever had before they started tithing." And Pastor talks about this all the time. Sometimes we don't see that more than I've ever had before in actual money in our pocket. Sometimes we see it with a blessing. Think about this. You know, my daughter's 10 years old, so I haven't seen the full outcome of the way we've raised her yet. But do you think that somebody who proved to or showed to their kids, and by the way, I would not hide, you can hide maybe money-wise the number from your kids of what you're giving, but I would not hide the fact that you're giving. Make a big deal about it. When Emma has sold some bracelets and things like that, and when she gets money in, in the grand scheme of things, it means nothing to her couple dollars that she's giving. But we make a big deal about it. Hey, make sure you set aside your 10% for God. And she writes it out and puts it in an envelope, which sometimes it's probably costs more for the envelope than what she's putting in. But we want her to know this is really important. And so, no matter how much you're making, if you're making $2 or if you're making $2,000, you get in a habit of giving to God. So I wouldn't hide the fact that, you see it often, people will slip it into the plate. And I understand not wanting to make a big show. I understand that. But your kids should know you're giving. They should know that and teach them how to give. But I wrote this in my margin here. This lesson is not begging for money because that's not my job anyways. But it's an opportunity for you to get in on the best investment ever. Now, I'm sure some of you are into investing and you're always looking for an opportunity maybe to make some passive income or things like that. But what is always involved in investing? Always. Risk. Always. It doesn't matter if they've got a business plan that, man, this can't be beat. There is risk involved. There's not risk involved in this investment opportunity. And what I mean is, this is what Paul is saying. He was telling them, I'm asking that you'll give that you can have fruit abound to your account. I'm not asking, he's basically saying, I'm giving you an opportunity to get on the ground level on this investment. And it's an awesome opportunity. You can't fail. It cannot go wrong. And I wrote this, God's work will happen with or without our money. But he gives us first dibs on this investment opportunity. And I wrote this, like somebody looking for investors. This model is guaranteed a great return on investment, and someone is going to make that ROI. Somebody's going to make it. It might as well be me. It might as well be me making these returns on the investments that I'm giving back to God. And I'm not being cute or facetious at all. This is God's work, and it will succeed. And we get an opportunity to be part of that success, to be part of what God is doing, not just in our church, but in eternity. Be a part of seeing souls saved. He says this in Malachi chapter 3, and sometimes Baptists preachers get a bad reputation for using this verse because it's in the Old Testament, and you're just using that to try to pull money out of people. But I think it very much applies. Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, he says, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it." And I think it very much applies to our giving. This is the word tithes. This is the 10% that we're talking about. But it is in the Old Testament, and he is talking to the Jewish people here. But it applies to his people. We are his people. Bring you all the tithes into the storehouse. And that's not the key, that there may be meat in mine house. And here's the key. Prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts. You don't think this is a good opportunity for an investment? Prove it. Prove me. And what he's saying is give and watch. And he says that, if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing. He didn't say money. Pour you out a blessing. It may be in the form of money. It may be in the form of another earthly investment that really takes off and is really successful. But he says, prove me. I'll open the windows of heaven, pour you out a blessing. You won't even be able to receive it. That's an awesome promise. And then lastly, cheerful giving. And here's, I think, probably the most important of all. Maybe not, whatever. As we grow in the Lord, we cheerfully give, beyond 10% because we understand God's blessing. And this is the free will offering that he's talking about. If you're, and I don't mean to be mean, I understand that we especially now with inflation is what it is and everything else, everybody's tight. But if you are, looking at the net check that you get in the I was going to say in the mail, everything's direct deposit now, but that if you're looking at that net and going down to the very penny and the tenth of the penny, and that's not cheerfully giving what God has given to you. And I'm not saying that God's going to judge you for doing that, but he does command us to give cheerfully. 2 Corinthians 9:7. Every man, according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give. Okay, so what is he talking about? This is implied here, that this is not the tithe, because every man doesn't get to purpose what he's going to give. Well, I'm only giving 2% then. If that's, God's saying I get to choose. He's saying this is above the tithe. Whatever you purpose in your heart, so let him give. Not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. God loveth a cheerful giver. And I hope you give cheerfully. It doesn't, I'm not saying it never crosses your mind that when you get your statement at the end of the year that you gave X number of dollars, you're like, man, that's another car or whatever. I'm not saying that doesn't cross your mind, but it shouldn't be every time you put the check in, you're going, man, that's just stupid. I hate this. That's not, you might as well not give. Which goes back to when we stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Remember we talked about this? And our works will be judged. What is he judging? That motive. Why were you giving? Is it because you love to give to God's work and you love what's going on in your church and you want to be giving money toward that? Or are you doing it because the pastor, if he sees that I'm not giving, he's going to kick me out of the choir, or whatever, right? So God loveth a cheerful giver. As God prospers us for keeping him first in our lives, we give back to him in according to the amount of his blessing. He says that in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. We see that in our book. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. It's going to be different for everybody, but as God prospers you, you give back to him. And as you begin biblical giving, you will quickly learn the joys that come from giving to the Lord. You will learn how God meets all of your needs, even when your finances don't work out on paper, and you'll enjoy hearing the reports of those saved on the mission field as a result of your financial help. And I think that's probably, because we're so close to the work here, we get excited when we see somebody saved. But I love seeing reports from the missionaries that, hey, we're doing this, and we started this Sunday school, and we're, had 40 kids last week in there. Man, that can change a generation. Maybe for that village or for that community, but it can change a generation in another country. those kids getting saved and understanding what it means to be a Christian. So love seeing those, but our financial giving helps that. And in Luke chapter 12, he says this, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Are you scraping every extra penny you have? And I understand being wise with our money, and that is a whole nother lesson. But are you scraping everything you have and buying silver because I have to hedge against what's happening? It's wise to do that. But is everything you have going toward you? For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. If everything you have is for me, I have to do this, and I've got to protect my assets, and that's where your heart's going to be, because that's where your treasure is. But if you're giving to God's work and you love God's work, that's where your heart's going to be, and it's going to be obvious. And I wrote this last comment in my book here, and then we'll close. Some of the wealthiest men in America's history were Christian men who gave generously to God, and God blessed them. But he used their giving to build Bible schools and train many men for ministry. And I think we're still seeing the results of that in our country. Why are we still able to hang on? We just heard about all the Bibles that are still sold every year in America. Why? I think it's because it's still blessing that came from some of these men giving to God's work. And even though he had blessed them tremendously in some of their business and things like that, they gave back to God. Their heavenly rewards, I wrote, far outweighed their earthly gains. When they left a lot of money. And where are those fortunes now? Who knows? Their kids probably, spent it all and it's gone. But their earthly rewards, as he talked about last week, they were able to get to heaven, get their crowns, lay them back at the feet of Jesus Christ. We can't take it with us. God gives it to us to multiply what he's doing. And it's very, very important as a Christian that we learn this. Whether you've been a Christian for 10 days or 10 years and never learned it, it's very important that we learn how to give back to God, not just in our money, but in everything we have, how to be a biblical steward of what God's given us. All right? Let's pray, and we'll be done. Father, I thank you again for the day you've given us. Thank you for your word. And I thank you for all the principles and the truths and the promises and the commands in it. And I pray that we would heartily and joyfully get behind everything that you command us to do. Because with that command comes a promise of blessing when we do it. And I pray that we would give to you cheerfully, that your work would continue to go forward here in this church. And God, as the money is used, I pray that you give our pastor wisdom and guidance as we start ministries and use the money that your people sacrificially give. And I pray that you bless each one of us for being good stewards of what you've given us. Pray that you bless the next hour. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. And we're dismissed.
A precious friend is Jesus. Through the good times and the bad, when there's joy